Sarah Rachel Barasch. Currently live in Ototahi, Christchurch in New Zealand, Aotearoa. And those are the Maori names for where we live. And I was living in Philly when the stuff we're going to talk about was happening. It's actually one of the clearer memories. I don't remember meeting all of my good friends, but when Emet he got into RRC and he was planning to come. I can't remember if he had come yet or if he was gonna be moving there very soon. He got in contact with me, I think just over Facebook Messenger, I could be wrong, about getting involved with If Not Now, because when he was coming to rabbinical school was when the core group of us were really getting If Not Now Philly off the ground, when our trainings were still very obviously targeted at the people that could build the early leadership. When the trainings were full fucking weekends, excuse my Philly, but they were a big lift at the time. And so I guess Emet being someone who I want the leadership opportunity instead of really it's 48 hours was cool. So he just got in touch right as he became an RRC student and was moving to Philly to be like, hey, I'd love to be involved. I had been Facebook friends with him already, so I knew what he looked like, but I didn't know how reliant he was on a wheelchair until we met, because it was interesting. We both experienced each other's Facebooks. We were both very well known in our community activists who understood that we'd just be friends. It wasn't really, I never thought to myself, why would Emet contact me with such frankness? He was clearly mishpacha, even though I didn't know him at all and really didn't have any mutual friends yet, real friends, because he wasn't in the same city as us. And I'm not from the East Coast. So when we met, I think it's interesting. I think this is probably something I've been told too. I was surprised at how small he was physically, how diminutive sized he was, because he was also in a wheelchair at that point. So he was petite to begin with, as smaller than me when I was skinny, and he was skinny because of his gastro. And so he was just small. This is a key part of what he contacted us about. His overture to introduce himself was really couched around making sure it would be a wheelchair accessible training. And I'm always really grateful to remember that part. It just is easy to forget because it was such a part of how Emet approached people. And he, I think, had this knack for actually checking on accessibility and pushing accessibility without people even knowing they were being held accountable, because it was always actually an invitation to do the mitzvah, right? He really expected people to accommodate him, not to make a point, but because it was just the right way to be. He came to you with the expectation that you would first. And I think that's really radical teaching. So he did. That's why he contacted us. It was I'd love to get involved, and that made us, that's really, Emet was the reason that Repair the World was the main site. If we couldn't, or the backup was that co-working space, did a lot of our stuff, and that's probably still there on Pentridge, because both of those spots are in West Philly, and West Philly was actually easier to find accessible space than Center City. A lot of why If Not Now took root literally in the area it did, and the venues we used, the relationships we cultivated with those venues, so they would be willing to give space to us. And we were really disruptive already to the very kinds of spaces we were. Repair the World's staff was with us, but their funders still never were. So we just used those spaces because that was where Emet could be always assured to be able to just come and go by himself too. Emet taught me a lot about supposed accessibility in that case being, well, if you're a leader, can you hold the code and open the door for people? If you're in a wheelchair, is a different prospect than can we go get a staff person and have you in the back entrance. So yeah, no, we only went with venues where Emet was could be equally not just accessible to it, in charge of what he wanted or needed to be in charge of. Like Emet could get around Repair the World completely by himself. So that was dope.
Repair the World Philadelphia is closed now, but
I bet.
Every time I drive past it, I always
Nothing
wave.
good can last.
I always wave and I always say, "Hi, Emmett. Hi, Repair the World." Because every time I would visit there, I would write Emmett's name on the
The
chalkboard.
chalkboard. Such a
On
good
written there.
space.
Yeah.
That space, I rolled my eyes and I laughed, but it's painful. We've lost so many spaces,
Right.
to
Right.
cheat spaces to be political. It's really
Yeah.
essential. I mean, it had so much to do with unlearning my internalized slut shaming, a lot of sexism and stuff about myself. Grounding this in ACT UP and pretty rooted in the principles of ACT UP writ large has been a really big part of my grieving process, like being, I think, as much as you could, fruitful and not. And I do believe that. I love the idea of bodies that are buried, even though Emet, I will choose to be cremated, but same concept. We're parts of trees in the end. We become plants and trees, and I think that's very much the understanding I have of the Jewish death rituals and why we go back to the earth. It's actually not hard for me to imagine our grieving bears fruit.
It does.
Our bodies decomposing and bearing fruit is actually the closest I can imagine to reincarnation. So I'm comfortable saying that has been kind of the key for me making more sense of it with time and not rushing my pronouncement on the experience. Well, the one in Center City was really nice. They were actually both really nice, even though the transition up to another hospice location was stressful just because of the nature of transferring hospice locations is always going to be. And that's kind of, I think, a necessary evil sometimes because it just is. Both places were cool in their own way, but the Center City one became, obviously it wasn't the right place for him to end his life because of various factors, and I was really pleased with some of especially the nurses at the second place. But the first place had the appeal that people wanted to come, was right off of so many transit routes, and it was in Rittenhouse basically. So the building was nice, and then the room was actually, I mean, it was almost a studio apartment downtown because that you could have friends sleep in. And I don't know that anyone else's hospice room felt like that, to be honest. But it had an accessible shower and a toilet, a really comfortable pull-out, and then his bed and a small window that actually did look a little bit into Center City, even if it was an alley. It would be a perfect location to be able to just have friends crash. It's so convenient. And he really made that into the slumber party vibe as often as possible. So it was usually, in normal hours, it was actually usually very full of people kind of kikiing. And if you didn't notice the obvious hospital physical accoutrement, you wouldn't have known it was a hospice room. So I thought that was really cool. I also, of course, remember my biggest sort of fidget thing I do to cope with stress, especially in the moment without dissociating, numbing out, is coloring. I've also taken up felting, which should surprise no one. I like little tedious handicrafts. And so at the time, I had really been doing that to sort of concentrate at school. And I just colored voraciously in Emmett's bedroom. And other friends then took it up. And so, of course, a lot of people remember the coloring gallery wall we created. And we created that in the second hospice room as well. it really organically took shape. Because there was a party and there was a living funeral. All the stuff that was salvageable was immediately became Emet's decorations, decor. So the decor really was, it was kind of a party city. Yeah, it was kind of party city, donated all of its stuff that it didn't really care about to a youth center, and the kids decorated it. But the kids are queers, so there was also just random stuff where you go, oh. Yeah, it was really, it really is crazy remembering it, because at the time I think it just felt, it didn't feel extraordinary because it was coping mechanisms. But now looking back, it felt daily life's, it felt you pulling that joy out. You could see it and you could feel, okay, well, I was coloring. I was also trying not to be the one who made the room feel sadder. But at the same time, that is what it is. And so in hindsight, it's very lush, very colorful. And I'm really happy that that's where my memories are. Because, yeah, I don't think anyone else's room looked like that at either location. A lot of people do that intentionally, because I've thought about that a lot since. All of my colored in little pictures, there's only a couple, but I put in the box of stuff that you're never really going to put up or put out. You've got a box of real personal letters or notes or whatever. And in there are 3 of just, there's nothing on them. I just know where they were colored, and Vic knows where they were colored, and they're just little scenes of nature or whatever, but that's what they are. So
if you have any of the art from Emet's hospice room, I would love to have pictures. I'm collecting everyone's art from it.
Yeah. That would be doable for sure, because as we find them, it's always very helpful to me to have those directives, because as I find something, I'll just snap it immediately next time I find it, and I'll send that to you for sure.
The way I visualize this project is that poem at the top.
Yeah.
And then a picture gallery.
That's been one of my favorite poems for several years. So when you said that, I was, woo! Well, and Paul Robeson being West Philly,
right,
so near Paul Robeson's house. Yeah, and Gwendolyn Brooks is just someone I think an English teacher of mine liked a lot. So I read a lot of her poetry when I was a lot younger. So it actually felt like a sign yesterday so I was like, oh shit, I think Noah sent me some texts and I assumed they'd be about this, but then they were mostly just a lovely poem and all this reflection. And I was, see, this is how Noah always makes you feel. And I've been learning a lot about felt, what it is to trust your own body when you've been taught not to. And a good feeling from a friend is actually factual evidence.
Yeah.
And Emet was that.
Exactly.
It's very hard to explain with words, because I think a lot of people will hear, oh, I took off and spent several months with my friend and hospice and then the aftermath, and it was a big part of my life, but I'm not exactly sure how to talk about it. And the normal person sympathetic response is a good one, right? It's like the right response, but it's really hard to explain so often, that it was actually it was an easy decision for me to make based on the resources I had available. And really the difficulty with balancing so many things. It was too many things we were expected, and I think all graduate students are expected to balance. But Emet's situation being unmovable and unchangeable actually just clarified everything else for me. And it made him the first and easiest decision to make. And I really believe Emet really did. He really offered me my way out of what felt the only path because I'd spent so much time and money on it, but clearly wasn't. I was very young to be feeling that way, but we all are. It's just the nature of the times we live in. But Emmett, I think so much of being around him at that time was a lot of why I didn't end up catastrophizing. I ended up just finding other ways to be myself and create a new life because of his influence and the kind of friend he was, and that all that time spent because I felt obligated to make sure he wasn't lonely in hospice because he was my real friend, just gave me a ton of time where my close friend gave me a bunch of really supportive words and love, hugs. And like time watching shows that I still like. Once that it took longer than I understood it would because of all the other grief that happened alongside of it and has continued to happen. Once the pain of the recentness of his death wore off, mostly just nice memories. Considering how he died, that says a lot. That physical version of him doesn't haunt me. And I was worried that it would because it is really intense to watch someone die of starvation. But in the context it's not the part that surfaces the most. And it feels the easiest to talk about, frankly, because people understand that. But everything else is 90% of it for me. He was just always really happy to see you, but he also didn't suffer fools, and his friendship was genuine. Walking in and him lighting up was just a really intense dopamine hit of its own. And I say that because I worked with dogs right afterwards, and I really think I chose the transitional career of dog care because of Emet, not just because Emet had a dog and sport dogs. I wanted to make it sound respectable and intellectual, but it wasn't that, and it isn't that. I recognized that I needed a life and a job, especially after the intensely critical and unkind behavior, like RRC and some other places, that I needed that feeling that I had with Emet and with my real friends, and animal care and dogs especially provide, of constant positive affirmation. And you said, I think we were chatting a while ago, I laughed so hard when you told me that Emet told you Sarah shouldn't have lost her job. I laughed so hard because that's why his friendship felt so genuine, and I think it's something I've carried, especially in New Zealand. I'm really outspoken and assertive without trying to be, because especially the white culture here in the South Island, especially women, it's very progressive in some ways. Conversationally, it's very passive. It's just a passive conversational culture, and Emet and I are one and the same, and that if we love you, we have to tell you the truth. James Baldwin is our guide. If I love you and we must tell you the truth. And people I don't care about, I'm perfectly nice to. Yeah, there wasn't time to beat around the bush. So in that vein, there's something that I do want to talk about in this, but I'm not sure where to couch it. So I thought I'd just bring it up. But something that I have thought about a lot because of the ways that particularly disabled people's sexuality is talked about and used by the people around them, family members, friends, whoever narrative feels fed by that. Emmett and I talked about sex a lot, and Emmett expressed that he really wished he'd dated more and had more kinds of sex with more kinds of people. That was so good and affirming because we do not have similar sexual histories, and he never will, but we had a similar ethos and ethic, and we're both dealing with having grown up queer, and in his case trans, in these very upper crust Jewish communities, which I have to say very focused on appearance. Not just appearance pretty, but appearance, all of the trappings of class and culture being good in America, really at the expense sometimes of the very sex positive, body positive, more progressive Jewish attitudes we could have. Being pro everybody actually having access to the full expression of their sexuality in addition to their gender, not just their gender, feels important to say because as the friend that Emet talked about that with, among a few, Annie wrote about it, I don't want Emmett's history to be sanitized like that because it's fucking disrespectful. He was a hot 24-year-old. Really good hair. So one thing I really liked, because I knew how to do his hair, in part because his hair was that very typical Ashkenazi hair, a little more similar to black hair, but he was not black. He was white. And so he had a beautiful hair texture I was very familiar with because of family members of mine who were mixed. And so I loved doing his hair, and he was really attractive. If he had stayed and been around, he would have had the chance to be the slutty, gay, whatever it had ended up being. He wanted to go dancing. He wanted to do all the young, slutty, queer. Slut as a form, a point of pride in being a faggot. He was fagala on purpose.
Right.
And Emmett was from Memphis, and I'm from St. Louis. It took a lot of courage to be who he was to begin with, full stop. I can't imagine being a child in that context was really easy, and we know it wasn't. But yeah, I want people to know that he was bedbound at that point, but he was kikiing just like any other your friends at the bar. He just couldn't get to the bar, and he wasn't going to be able to again. So a lot of the coolest people, some of the coolest people I met in his room, I only met once or twice. They weren't people who were Philly based or who were able to stick around. They were just, it's kind of cool that I don't even remember them all. There were just some cool people who stopped through. Yeah. Because it felt like the thing you had to pay tribute to Emet if you could. And I think that was really appropriate.
Can you talk a little about both being from the South?
Yeah, and this is easier to talk about now because my mom has also passed. Zichrona Livracha. But my mom was really also mentally ill. I don't feel like I'm speaking on Emmett's mom because I don't really know what went down there, but I know that Emet had a really difficult early life too, and his parents obviously had a lot of different difficulties, and he didn't end up being adopted at like 10 or 11 by people in a whole different state, let alone part of the country, for no reason. So, and truthfully, I don't remember it all. I'm kind of glad when I don't just remember the vagaries of my friends' bad childhoods, because I think it means I let it go a little.
Yeah.
But we both came from, especially on my mother's side, very wealthy, very white, and very attached to whiteness. Southern Jewish families, my mom's family in Mobile and New Orleans, but actually also a little bit in Nashville. And then his was in Memphis and Atlanta. So it's important to, I think, acknowledge, because in the context of the world, that's a pretty small world, even in the Jewish community. Well, you're not from Memphis, but my mother, dramatic side of the family with a lot more documented mental illness and suicide, was quite similar actually to Emet. I think we both just kind of knew I think we were both in charge of our emotional well-being very young, but because we were also very precocious intellectually, that was also encouraged all the time, and it was always encouraged. And it's also a lot of what allowed him to take control at the end, because he had a lot of practice being the adult in the room. That's what Emmett and I really shared that way. And being from the South is also just the constant recognition that racism is real, Jim Crow is still very much alive, and you better be lucky we're not mad about you right now, faggot. So you can't, and Memphis is, I have to say, Memphis is a very racist place. One of my ex, who's Black, wasn't served in Memphis. He was driving through with his siblings, and Memphis is the place we mentioned. They just straight up wouldn't seat them, and it was obvious because they were Black roadside diners. So that's Memphis. It's still like that. St. Louis is like that too. So I think Emmett and I were also very bonded, and that we'd always been hyper aware of how. Then when he moved to New York, especially, and Riverdale is an interesting place to live in terms of being immersed in a lot of racial dynamics. So in a lot of ways, Emmett was just one of my white friends who understood race the same way I did, and that's quite specific. So that, I think a lot of that was because of the Southern background we shared, and that we had talked quite a bit about. Like how we ended up so left wing in both our cases was because of the privilege we came from, and the simultaneous, because we were both living in big enough cities and came out very young as queer and pulled into leadership programs, but also things where we met people from a lot of other backgrounds and races because of queerness. The only shared thing, Emmett and I just had a very diverse group of friends for our context, and also a deep commitment to Black liberation specifically, which is at odds with the family interests of who we come from. So that was one of our biggest shared things, was just being really committed to being class traders. And I feel really proud of that. And I'm proud to have learned it from him, because he really did give away all his money. We were there.
Yeah. Like
we were there when there was no more. Emmett was that committed to his very accessible apartment going to someone who needed it as much as he had, rather than just a random person who was happy to have a ground floor apartment. He got really into selling it before he died, because it was, and at the time it was interesting. Oh, we'll do that. But oh no, it was also, it gave him something to do.
Right.
That he was better at than us. We weren't the experts on where to sell how to get that. No, he was still the expert until he died on what it was like to have those conditions and navigate that environment. And he really made sure, he was such a yenta, I should say. That's how I would claim him, and I identify that way. Well, oh my God. It's also giving young Streisand. I love it. Yeah. You always got to be a little extra. Flamboyant. Yeah, I liked it too. That was actually something we really shared too. I think maybe that's why the room took shape the way it did, because I'll say I have synesthesia. I don't know, but I'm very color oriented, and I do remember things much more when I remember the colors. And Emmett was also really wanted his hair to be really bright, even though, and we realized quick, because everything else was fading, but his hair was still turquoise, or at least green, when he passed. And that was impressive, because I thought that was great that he was, no, I want my hair to be redone, when we were still at the hospice room in Center City. I want my hair to be the color. And I was fair. Okay, yeah, I don't want my last pictures to be of a totally different hair color than I've had. A reminder of how few people can do that, or learn to do that, or do that young. I think a lot of people get on that kick, especially those of us assigned female at birth, in his case too. Yeah, to be that assertive and clear. I think that maybe that was really helpful for me when I was learning how to really actually have to say no for the first time to a lot of different people I hadn't been able to say no to before and suddenly really needed to. And that was a great example of no was a full sentence.
Can you talk a little bit about the organizing that went into caring for Emet, Excel sheets?
Yeah, so Emet was really clear that, so he actually called me up and was, hey, you will go for coffee or something. And I was sure. And that's when he was, I'm going to go on hospice. And I was, wait, what? And then that's, I mean, that initial conversation, he was, here's how it's going to go. He just sort of launched into, and I've thought about it. So here's how it's going to go. And I'm just sitting there being, okay. Okay. Yeah. I'm just going along. And he was, I don't remember very much from that. I just remember that he didn't want to be alone and he really didn't want to sleep alone. And so it really is what Mordecai described in an interview I did with him. The recklessness and daring when your body is young is something you miss, because the idea of taking that on now, I get tired thinking about it because I've also done it. And like at the time I hadn't. So I had, and I'm glad I had the recklessness of youth, the chutzpah to be, yeah, sure, which is not usually true. A lot to do, I think, with my organizing style and probably why we both work together so well, because yeah, we were both super idealistic, but in that I know how the world really works way, but very much Olam Haba. We must strive for Olam Haba, and if we only reach pure socialism, we will have succeeded. So, you know, he was, I don't want to sleep alone. And I was very good, very good. I'll do my best not to let you. And then that just became a spreadsheet. I don't remember a lot about the why. It just was, well, that's just what you do when you're organizing. You make a Google sheet and you ask people to put themselves in. And I have written a poem about it. And if you don't have that, I will send it to you. I'll send all my poetry again to you. It's about Emet because I'm very happy with the poetry too. But there's a line in there, I called it spreadsheets, about them feeling like little, each box a little room you could crawl inside and rest for a while. And I think we really were trying, at the end, we really were visualizing it that way. You're just stopping by a capsule of time. And if you recognize that the spreadsheet really does hold a certain number of hours, and that number of hours is limited, you don't know if the state is necessary. You should just sign up for it. And what that literally means is you don't know if he's going to be still alive. But if you sign up for it, if he is, he's not going to be alone, and you're not going to feel bad because you just flaked, didn't think to sign up. You'll at least know you were going to try. I didn't say things verbally like that to people. First of all, I don't think that's the approach that would have worked. It's just in hindsight where I can see how our ask brought in a lot of different kinds of people who do want. I just really believe that a lot of people really want to be more available and present and supportive of people they care about. And we live in cultures that do everything they can to depersonalize and to personalize the real issues and push us apart until we can't solve it ourselves. And I think Emet's insistence on finding another way was why I've really become such a principled anarchist, because before I would have nodded and maybe assented to people saying things, well, you know, it could never work though, so we have to dial back our expectations. And to that, really, at this point in my life, I say that's not true in my experience. My experience is that the great anarchist writers and thinkers, many of them Black, say you have to start it in small, and it doesn't mean it's not revolutionary or that couldn't take off really fast. You just have to keep proving it to yourself in the way that you practice community. And really, that was a perfect test ground because there was no other option to plug it into. There wasn't a network, and there wasn't a network of, and it really made me appreciate all the people like my dad, especially, for whom they're really the focus of their Jewish their Jewish spirituality and time is on Gemilut Hasidim, no matter who it is. So my dad actually volunteers in the gift shop at the hospital where my cousin is head of pharmacy, and my mom. Lots of people we know have either been at this hospital or worked at this hospital. And my dad just volunteers at the gift shop now, and it makes him really, really happy. And I think about that a lot because, Gemilut Hasidim, a hitter mitzvah, these things took shape in many ways because of the same way with, if not now, or with any shul or with any anarchist community, it quickly becomes clear that due to the human life cycle, there are specific needs for any community worth its salt. It doesn't matter if you met through Food Not Bombs. If those friends don't tell you they're sorry when your granddad died, you're going to be offended. It doesn't matter that they're not those kinds of friends. People you care about naturally do become those kind of friends. So I can easily think of Emet's hospice room and anarchism works fine if everyone works, and not just if everyone has the same values to begin with, but if people work on having the same values with each other, recognizing what are values and what are just different approaches to tasks. And yeah, Emet drew people with the same values really close because I think we also really benefited from his friendship, because people like us who are often accused of stridency and then thanked 10 years later, we rarely have friends who affirm us in the moment that intensely. So Emet really made me feel less of a problem and the person he really needed for the thing, where my stridency and my willingness to kind of cajole or guilt accuse whatever was necessary, which is a sales. I really attribute that to my dad being a super successful salesman and teaching me the schmooze, the art of the schmooze. I applied all of that without thinking. His one request, which was actually a fucking huge request, which was, I don't know how many nights it's going to be, but I don't want to be alone any of them. Smart about starting his own Facebook group for people that would want to come and see him in hospice, and it included friends from across the country, several of whom did make an effort and came in person. And it was, it really also emphasized to me that when I hopefully after the end of a long life, no, mine is ending, I hope I'm in a big city, because it was way easier to visit him for the fact that he lived in Philly than if he'd lived in Memphis. And frankly, New York. So the New York airport is awful, and it's way easier to fly to Philly and visit someone in Center City and then jet somewhere else. So he really happened to have this very convenient ask for the nature of the ask. And the Facebook group had been going for a while, and because he lived longer than expected, I think he created it because it was his friends. And then he gave a few of us, you and me, he got more free with it as the time went on, but he gave a couple people the ability to log into his phone and do it for him. We'd do that. But it really was his Facebook group, but then he wasn't managing the asks, and that's what he asked us to do. So I would just get on there and have to be. Well, you know what I think, Noah, really motivated me, and I have no problem saying this. I really have internalized the message that if you're a leader and you don't want to do a thing, you still have to delegate it, and you have to support the people you delegate it to. And I knew I did not want to be the person who stayed in the room almost at all, because the nature of sleeping over and then doing my job, it was way harder for my ADHD brain. So I focused on making it really easy for the friends and the people who for whom that was easy or fun. Yeah, so that really was the motivation, was I did not want to be the person that slept there almost at all, because I was having a good time dating for the first time after my divorce, and I wanted to be able to sleep over with cute people that weren't Emet. And he wanted that for me too, but he also knew I would always just be the last minute. But I almost never slept in that room. I think I only slept once in the one in Rittenhouse and once in the one out in the suburbs, because I just leaned on people who also had their own car. It was very helpful to point out without, I don't know, I guess I just really found a sweet spot of guilt for me, a sweet spot of really feeling a yenta or a shadchan. The match was easy. It was the match with just a companion for the evening to keep you going. And so I think some of the tactics we also used were other people who had been also just became more active about, yeah, it's great, please. And also just pointing out the good parts, really promoting the fact. I said I have no problem just using all the tactics, but it was easy to market. He was into it because he was also a cute young millennial and he wanted to have a moment. And so he would Facebook Live or whatever we were doing at the time. He'd be streaming and he'd be posting and he'd be doing all kinds of shit. One night, I mean, the guy from, was it Panic at the Disco? Yeah. Also, you were in downtown Philly. So you could walk the dog, you could go smoke a joint, do whatever you needed to do. You weren't stuck in a disgusting and depressing hospital because it really being a, I found that actually these places focused on hospice and palliative care that people with a little more resources can afford generally have made the effort to be a pleasant enough physical environment that you're not avoiding that part. So it really was, hey, it's just free. It's actually a free place to stay in the center city. Like you would never you would never even be able to afford a hotel room there. I wouldn't pay for a hotel room in Rittenhouse, but feel like you live in Rittenhouse and do the ultimate mitzvah. What's not to like? Damn, I went right back into it. But see, that's where I got the appreciation for people who do give me Lut Chassidim and are my dad, that is my role in my shul because, and really emphasize, it's not about who it is. It's about being the kind of people who do it because that person just has some affiliation and we consider them mishpacha is the end of the sentence. And I love that. Emet taught me to stand up for that and if you're in this group, there's a reason. And so this is the ask.
Influence of If Not Now.
If Not Now was so revolutionary in a way that will only be understood down the road because truthfully it is important that right now we are focused on the effects for pro-Palestinian and liberatory effects right now in this genocide. But when I think about this, I really do realize the same organizing tools, the literal tools that we were working on mastering and sharing were the same ones we used for Emet, just the same approach to staffing a training or an action. And that approach of I think it was at the time, it was if 4 or more people who have been trained by If Not Now say it's an If Not Now action and it follows the principles, it's an If Not Now action. And that's anarchist organizing in the best, most straightforward way. And that's why in hindsight, If Not Now and the groups alongside us who were trained in the same model, Kosecha, Dream Defenders, etc., who are still going, lots of them are still being trained. We were just trained anarchists organizing. And that is so fucking powerful because that is how Emet was too. And I think that's also how Jewish community often or usually is, except I think the type of Judaism that is top heavy, a group of people, usually men. Now it's not just men, but still an elite appointed group of people determine who is and who is not Jewish and how. That's actually an anomalous way to do Judaism. And it's definitely just a modern, it's one modern approach, but it's not historically or culturally an accurate description of Jewish affiliation at all. Talk amorphously about what organizing is. Did so many good exercises that had been transmitted through these organizing trainings. I don't think they were particularly Jewish. And one of them was really, I have just the clearest memory of at my training and then doing it with others at other trainings. We stood in a circle and then you close your eyes and you imagine an ancestor. It can be a chosen ancestor or a biological ancestor with their hand on your shoulder and they're supporting you even if they don't quite understand. You pick someone you know will be supportive of what you're doing. And then you picture the ones outside of them have a hand as well. And then you picture one more, but you go slowly and you do it well. An actual guided visualization should go. And then you can always picture this group of concentric circles of ancestors supporting us and the circle you're in right here. I want you to think about, visualize something with pulling on these strands you now see you're connected to, and then everyone is crying. And it's a very powerful group experience that comes near the end. But I think about it all the time. I actually picture it that, especially Ashkenazi Jews whose families all immigrated around a certain time, our ancestors were friends or enemies or lovers or foes. They really had vibrant lives in Yiddish, really thought, they didn't think that part of Jewish history was going to end the way it did. They fully expected to just keep having. We would have been having these conversations in Yiddish in Bucharest or Vilna, but instead we're having them between New Zealand and Turtle Island. And that to me, though, is very, very, very comforting, because I really believe is what makes us so subversive, and also what makes a lot of anti-Semitism is rooted in that. Seeing us for who we really are as globalists and internationalists and rootless cosmopolitans, but turning it into a slur and a accusation of disloyalty. Yeah, I fucking hate nation states. Mordechai Kaplan. But it's true, and it resonates despite him being a very dry and boring writer, because the concept is very easy for Jews to understand, because it feels true. But the people that I actually do still really like and check in with occasionally are actually Emet's sister and Kate, and like Michael, the friends from high school. And then there were a lot of Philly friends and RC friends that overlap that I would still be close with. And I mean, actually, those main ones were you and Susha and Sarah Barasch. It would be interesting to compare Linda and Annie, because they are so comforting, but also so different in their approach. And Annie and I were actually pretty close at the time, too. I found her to be a very comforting rabbinic presence personally. Her and Yosef always were to me. Actually, Gray and I were friends with them as a couple, and they were also really supportive of both of us when we were divorcing. A pretty hands-on way, which is personal and confidential, but is also really sweet. I've always remembered them as really very munchy people who were actively there. And also because Yosef was working in BZBI at the time, so they were living in the pastoral house. But yeah, they lived in Rittenhouse, so that was also sometimes they'd let you park if you were just dropping something off, and there was no parking for the hospice. They'd let you park in their little driveway that they didn't need for the hour because they were out running errands. They were just also very similar to Emet and to you. They saw the location of happening to be able to live where they lived and how they lived during such a time. And they really got a lot. I'm sure they still do, but they got a lot out of how to use their privilege for good in just even the smallest circles of community around them. Yeah, I've just been thinking too a lot about, even though I struggle with lots of things about it, especially Zionism, I'm really glad I grew up. I'm actually really glad these days in this political world that I grew up around frum people and people who are more frum than me at Jewish day school. And there were a lot of really fucked up dynamics about my Jewish day school. But the worse the world gets and the less previous system continue to survive or work for us at all, I really feel grounded in the community models I was shown, their ability to weather a lot of storms. And I think it's pretty cool that Emet gave us the real life chance to practice it.
Watching rabbinical students practice
in
a kind of lab space where they were experimenting.
You're actually not even a little bit exaggerating. It actually was, for all the bells and whistles, that's what RRC said it offered, right? That's what the graduates, and I'm not just talking about RRC, that's what graduate school is. A container, is really just a financial container, especially late stage capitalism, for people to, it's an overpriced apprenticeship, because it becomes clear that it's an apprenticeship model And in functioning economies, an apprenticeship model does not require you to go 6 figures in debt to learn it. But we were apprenticing, and I think it's really special to note that because those rabbis were also not paid extra to be there. Those people were not able to count those hours as their RRC field supervision. They were just supervising us in a much more intense environment than any of the internships that would have paid us, frankly, because it's your friend. It's a different kind of experience. So rabbis were doing double duty. That's crazy. I felt like Vic still wants Lonnie to do his conversion. Still want David Goodman to do my wedding. Zusha is someone that I'm not even going through the whole list. Zusha is someone I credit with being one of my most important friends, because through that and after that, he was also incredibly present and helpful with mental health stuff with me, my partners. He's really just one of my favorite humans. But there are people like that from the wider West Philly shtetl. There are people that also just I'll remember had something they did for Emet. My contribution to the handout was a poem. I think it was the D.A. Powell poem that was included, but those 3 poems were all from Boston Gordon. That was their contribution. Emet liked that people who really knew their craft or who were cool in the context of his world did find ways to do cool shit for him or sent him cards or the Panic at the Disco.
Hey, Emet. We love you. So proud to have been able to work with you and be part of all the ways that you've changed the world.
And you'll always be a part of the Glisson family.
Hey Emet, it's me, Brendan. I just want to say I heard about your wish, and I wanted to send you this message. I really wish I could be there to send it in person, but regardless, I want you to know how inspired I am to know how much Panic and our music has meant to you. I am inspired by all you've accomplished and all you've given to this world. So I want to send you my peace and my love and my appreciation and just tell you I love you and thank you. I really appreciate you. And yeah, I love you. Thanks, Emet.
That's really rad. He was so chutzpahdik. It was just this attitude of very Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland. Let's put on a show. And you're like, how can you not? You're adorable. I'll go along with this. It would be fun. That's actually the feeling I had today, because I knew if I scheduled this, I would do it. But I mean, it's a natural thing I think that I want to avoid talking in depth about it because it's normal, right? It's not that I'm still horribly or really traumatized in general about the experience. It's just very sad. But I knew you and me, our friendship is definitely rooted in that experience. And you're not the only person either. Kaden, there are 3 or 4 people who, even if I never talk to you, I know you're very important people to me. I feel bad and I always try to find a way to reconnect. I still really care about you. They're all from Emet's hospice room. It really was a pressure cooker. I've come to understand some bad behaviors and parts of people that I was disappointed by around him as an outgrowth of the same thing. It's very easy for me to understand when we're dysregulated. we do things we regret, or we say things we regret, or we're not as sensitive as we could. That was the minority of Emet's experience, but we sometimes had to fight for that to be true. But it's very easy for me to understand it all in the same context of human responses to difficult situations. To go meet someone and I have no compunction talking about this because it is the state of things, and I wrote a poem about it. I had to go pick up some morphine for him from a disabled person who I can spare some of mine because there was a nationwide shortage. There was no IV Benadryl, but it was also fucking morphine. There were just shortages of major drugs that were needed. We were in fucking Philadelphia, and Philly isn't just a big city, it's a center of medical research as well. There's a ton of teaching hospitals. And the poem is really stark because, I mean, I remember it so well because I've also read it a bunch of times and people really get a lot out of it. The snow and trying to park in the gray snow around Northern Liberties so I can go to this person's house, and she hands me a vial and she's just, I wish I could help him some other way. And it was really helpful. And she's like, do you want a hug? And I'm like, you need a hug. So yeah, sure, I'm going to give you a hug. It was like 3 minutes in person, but I remember driving back and being, oh, I just bought illegal morphine for my friend so he can die easier. And I don't feel I mean, I was already a cab, you know, but it wasn't about the legality or the illegality. It was so inhumane. There was absolutely no reason that his health insurance and being in the Penn health system, literally everything, it was still hard to die without a dramatic amount of discomfort, and just for capitalism. Just for capitalism. And I think we all know that. Right. And I think that comes back to why I don't feel the need to sugarcoat either the care Emet got before us. I was the medical advocate that Emet needed, and I really wish other people had been that whose job it was. I think it's really stark how much privilege can't buy you that in America. Honestly, Emet's death really laid bare a lot of things that I was already really realizing about the systems and about the lack of infrastructure underlying our lives. And let me just say, New Zealand lacks a lot of infrastructure, but it's a lot clearer where and when and how open. People do go to Australia for more advanced surgeries or whatever, going to the Midwest. Here, a lot of the difficulties about life are just more navigatable. Just trying to help one young person with a ton of relative privilege die. Yeah, the lack of access to pain management was really sobering. Emet was creating this core, and I mean CORPS, core of people who were more prepared for the pandemic than others. Yeah, I do feel that way. And I will be on the record saying I think that our choices, which they were Emet's choices, that he needed us to help him finish the tangible task to pick up the medicine. He bought it. I completely stand beside those choices. And I think the truth is that privileged people always find access to what they feel they need for themselves or their family members. And it's really important to keep emphasizing that these kinds of issues, and the COVID issues too, of inequality, are capitalist, human systems that we are still forced to live in. It has nothing to do with health and everything to do with maintaining the sense of power that they still have when we're not able to be assuredly healthy. It's the same thing writ large. And so making decisions to navigate that is very important, I think, to become utilitarian and to be willing to be utilitarian. And if you can, again, delegating. I know that I was often that person because of my chutzpah and also because of my track record in the Black Lives Matter movement of using my privilege to go into situations where, at the very least, I would not be one who would get arrested or beat up or jailed. And that's one of my superpowers. Through all of Ferguson and Palestine, a lot of people assume I've been arrested and that I'm just cool about it. I actually never have. I've never managed to be arrested. And so every experience I've had using my privilege to navigate a difficult situation for someone with less access, I've stayed safe. I've stayed as safe as I was going into it. And so it was a joy and a privilege to use that for Emet. But I think that the larger takeaway is not look at us when we're all special and can do a superhero thing. That's a practice. I do think that practice of being resourceful, optimistic, if you possibly can be, for those who have less than you, is the right way to be. And there have always been underground networks. Obviously, you know more than I do at this point, and I mean that in a good way, probably about ACT, like the specifics. We've always, queer people, women, people who need abortions, all of these things, we've always had to do things to find our care, find our medicine, whatever we need. This is not a new thing. This is what it was when people were dying of AIDS. This is what it's people of a certain race can't go to the doctor in the county they live in. This is when there's no more birth control or even birth control clinics in your state. You do what you have to do. I love that you emphasize that. It's really cool. The vibes of the nurses now. It makes sense to me that they were very queer, friendly, especially being where they were and how they were. Because I think everyone else that I saw that was there, besides Emet, was old, was clearly elderly. So it wasn't giving the AIDS this vibe, but the people, especially some of the nurses, frankly, the Rittenhouse staff had a lot more difficulty understanding his deal and the friends and the dynamic. Not so much once you got to the third floor, but yeah, I fought the reception on behalf of the dog, Roxy. I remember laying into them after he asked me to tell them to stop telling people to bring Roxy up the service elevator. It couldn't have been more like the contrast between and anything that's has less of a stick up its ass.
At the first hospice, they said Emet couldn't stay unless there was someone to care for the dog during the night.
Right.
Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah, I fucking remember that.
That was how it started.
I think that might have been the first fight I had to pick, and why when I will fight on site. That's what I mean. The next time someone passive aggressively or overtly tells us this isn't allowed, I am going to launch into my teacher mode, and I am going to explain to them why it is and see if they still want to deal. They never do. And then I remember him getting a little thing. He was like, oh, okay, we've told everyone. And I was okay, well, you're a fucking hospice, and you could have had literally any amount of knowledge of what a fucking service dog is. The takeaway for me really was, for all the prestige, all prestige is just window dressing. It's just political theater because, okay, your pen is supposed to mean something elite, but a very normal part of being a person who's disabled and needs medical care is being completely ignored. And I chose the attitude that actually made them look stupid, not us.
Yeah.
I just refused. I had to put on my imperious attitude because that's what they were giving, and they were making Emet feel nervous. That vibe of people from corporate have nothing better to do, and there's no need for the people in the position who are making a big deal about there being a dog. They're not going to get promoted. They're not going to get a bonus for being an asshole. That person's just there to be an asshole. That's clearly how they've chosen to do their job. And I was like, wow, okay, so you're going to pick on the nah. And that's what that brought out. Anytime Emet gave me a chance to kind of stand up to a bully and also educate about the underlying issue, that's like catnip for me. Where's the soapbox? Where do you want me to step? I would just get up on it. But it was instructive because this is supposed to mean something in Philly, but at the end of the day, they couldn't get a morphine and they couldn't fucking remember that service dogs are legally required to be present. And it doesn't matter if you don't want to walk the dog. You actually have to sit here and justify why you're making it difficult for the dying person to keep their fucking dog. Honestly, I will say this. I used to say this more because I've been taught to, and I know it's the right answer. But now I know it's the right answer. It really is. You have to be led. You just have to be led by the people with the most to lose, because Emmett set up that Facebook group, used it the way we were modeling how he taught us to use it for himself, because at first he was the only one making the asks. So really 100%, I can't emphasize enough, if you just listen to the people you're in solidarity with, whether it's the friend who needs this hospice support, or whether it's a group you're helping, or whether it's your friend or comrade who needs support for their issues in this other setting, if you just listen and you ask follow-up questions to clarify but not to take over, and then you just do the best you can at the thing they actually asked for, and you keep doing it and you're receptive to feedback, it's a practice, but that is the answer. Every time I've done the right thing, I think I can trace it right back to listening to the right person. I mean, the first person to really challenge me away from my very intense brainwashed Zionist thinking I had in college was because Michelle, a Pakistani student, not a Pakistani American, a Pakistani student, took the time to talk to me about it. And I didn't even change my views at the time, but I listened to her about, she said that the way I was sharing my views impacted Muslim women like her on campus, and I changed it. And I've looked back many times and been, wow, the story there, yes, I am receptive and responsive to good faith overtures. And the way that Michelle invited me to be a better person has made so much difference in the path I took in terms of Muslim and then Palestinian solidarity work. And Emmett was the exact same, because I think he was actually subtly holding us all accountable for not really knowing what we were doing, but just telling us really straight up what we could do and trusting that we would do our best. And that is a really big deal for people who've been fucked with their whole lives, politically or personally or both. For him to, I think you can do it, was actually really a big act of trust and a gift. Because now we know it was a big deal. I think we knew it, but at the time it was harder to grasp. And now, wow, he really asked me. I wouldn't have this if he hadn't actually just believed I could do that. And I love that Emmett was also having faith in his own vision. He really felt the need to make the last piece of his life art that was also worthy of his life. And it was. I mean, he inspired a lot of art from a lot of us. I mean, what you're doing is also, it's not just that you're doing it for him, you're doing it for the reasons that he did things and I do things. You're creating the model for other types of things. I know how equally important that is to you about this model that you're working in, not just because it memorializes him, but because it gives other people a blueprint for when this happens to them. Even if it's not going to be okay, you're still doing the right thing. A lot of my spiritual work for the past few years has been recognizing that the worst case scenarios do happen, and some of what I think of my worst case scenarios have happened to me.
Right.
And I'm still here. Yeah, I think it's really striking that our world is more difficult since then, or that things we were dealing with are unfortunately more mainstream that people are dealing with, right? So yeah, I believe that. And I believe, Noah, that even if you didn't think there were spirits, we all would probably still believe that the reason for initiating a thing has a lot to do with spiritual work it does in the world and continues to do. And even mentioning that this is the origin of it has spiritual power. So the spirits exist for sure because you and I have imagined them. That in itself is a truth to continue to bring, because it matters to us to let people know that that's what it was for. And it mattered to enough people there to let you know it used to be that. I think that alone is the easiest way to understand Zichronah Livracha. You just keep making it a blessing. You just keep doing it. It's a verb, Zichrona.
And
I was just talking about this actually because I met a new friend of mine telling me they have POTS. Like, I know what POTS is, and here's how I know. It's hard because I've told people, 2 different people I've met, one with EDS and one with POTS. The truth is my friend did die. And it always feels like he would want me to be honest when I talk to someone with those things, because POTS was one that a couple of people who were around him also had, and the amount of disabilities I didn't know about. So many people with these so-called invisible disabilities, or really just disabilities that are really documented, but the medical establishment still refuses to name and treat for obvious reasons, I think. Yeah, those folks were just there all the time. I absorbed so much knowledge, anger, and passion for their struggles just by being around the people that hung out. Well, you know when my mom died? March 31st, 2020. So that week, the year, yeah, that's the week where this week is both my mother's and Emet's yard site 1 year apart.
I'm so sorry, Sarah.
Thanks, but I also really believe, because remember my mom was an AIDS nurse, and I really think that both her and Emet, I really think of them in the same category of people who did everything they could to try and warn us and help prepare us, and then when the thing hit, they were peace. And I get a lot of comfort out of that, because I mean, my mom had Parkinson's, and so it was also a release. It was a release similar to Emet's actually, and Emet had prepared me. And blessedly, the part in the hospice was actually very, very, very short. I really do think it was, and I'm glad we didn't know, because it would have made it feel, when you think too much about the gravity of what you're doing, it becomes harder, I think, especially for those of us who are very abstract thinkers. But at the time, it was just like, well, he will be really sad if someone's not there tonight. Yeah, that's a good level of, I can think past a couple of days was a really big part, I think, of the effect of hospice. And I would say also that's a good thing for people to learn, especially in this world. It's actually so hard to slow down. It's very subversive to say no to work, to say no to come. But Judaism has a really healthy distinction between parnasa and tzvod, shalom. There are a lot of concepts that if we decide that our goal is to actually just make, I guess this is my take. My organizing mentor, Morgan, who's still a friend from St. Louis, who's also a queer man, would tell me all the time, you can only have one priority. You can have many things you value and try to get done, but at any given time, the one thing, priority means it has to take priority. And I think in many ways, Emet was the first time I really had to choose a priority and really fight for that to be the priority over and over again. Even if emotionally it was very easy for me to make sure it was the priority, I really had to fight for it in ways I never expected. So I think those kinds of things, those really intense things are happening, and Jewish life often just points them out for us. But if it doesn't, the best advice I can give, and you're very good at this too, I don't know if you would conceptualize it this way, is to really know your priority and to be willing to be uncomfortable for it. That's your role at the time. I don't think I always had all of Emet's interests in my mind. Couldn't, and I also pretend to. But when I knew I was honoring a priority, that it was very clear from our discussions, I knew exactly what he was asking for. Those are the strongest memories. And some of them were the hardest. They involved the hardest conversations with the most sensitive, volatile people. But they were the right decision. And I don't know, maybe other Ashkenazi people who understand this way of thinking are fellow Ashkenazi Jews and Black folks often, but the ability to just say no to shit that's getting in your way, distracting you from the important thing, if you can't learn how to do it respectfully, firmly with people when a loved one is dying, you'll never learn it. And I do really believe that people are giving you that opportunity to learn to stand up for what's right. And they're giving you one of the easiest opportunities because the majority of people respect being with someone when they're dying. It's just, even if they don't, they know they have to pretend to, right? So I really believe that if you can learn to prioritize around a death, which is something I didn't give myself credit for when it started. I can't do this. But I knew I had to just not have that approach. And by the end of it, I can do this. I don't like doing it. I don't like certain aspects of it. But I know it's what I'm supposed to do. And you don't have to have it forever. That's what I would also tell people. Just remind yourself, you only have to be this focused and this strong for so long. And also because of the community you're developing along with it, you'll be catching each other along the way, but you'll also be catching each other, in this case, for at least another 6 years. Probably the least lonely time I can remember, which is probably why it's also not the most stressful time I remember, because it was very stressful, but the memories of it don't filter that way. The memories filter the really strong memories of the people there. Emet also never depended on just one person. So physically, but also emotionally, he was very resourceful. I really think Emet was a mirror. I really believe that Emet was a mirror to where we were as much as we were his friends. Because our ability to show up and also other people's ability to show up or not show up mostly just said what we needed to know about them, and most of it's stayed true. Anyone who kind of brought negative energy or made that process harder has continued to be that way or become more like that, and vice versa. I just really, my ask of you as your friend is to work as much as you can on letting go of that guilt, because Emet would be really mad if he knew you felt that way. He'd be, I know you're sad, but you have to get over this and focus on, because I'm fine now. I'm up here. We don't know, and I don't know if either of us really believe in an afterlife, but if it helps you to think about being chilling, rad queers from history, smoking a blunt and being girl. Oh my God! Yeah, he is not concerned, I promise. But that's why this fucking happened. That's why the young people around him did the things. This was very much an intergenerational conflict. Oh yeah. And I trust you will tell the story that way. But at the end of the day, you have to remember that your role in it isn't as someone who could. The point was that Emet explored a bunch of avenues because who should have been taking care of him never did. And these synagogues and institutions that benefited from his money did not show up. And his work. Well, yeah, his work, but also his literal money. He endowed the only legal obligation RRC actually still has to me is that I'm a person who can ask. I and Zusha are the people that were on that scholarship and can check up for how it was used. Emet's executors should not have been his peers. Emet's executors should have been. There are a whole lot of adults and people paid a lot of money to do these exact things ostensibly who were supposed to do them. The reason we did them and our names are on these various funds is because they didn't. Or Andy, he didn't trust them to. They probably would like to have been the executors. But he didn't.
I wish
אני אוהבת אותך.
אני אוהבת אותך מאוד. הרבה.
אני מאוד שמחה that I showed up today. I'm really grateful to you for this. Yeah, I just feel like I've had to lie to keep people's feelings intact, but that's not the case anymore. All of this being present day is over. I don't really need to have that anxiety anymore. I can just chat to you and you will include the way that it's appropriate. Really trust your curatorial skills. That time is the time that one of my closest friends was dying. One of the worst times in my life, even if it is the most meaningful as well. And I got all these extremely meaningful friendships that I would only have if Emet dying. I said, for context, we all feel like things are getting worse and harder. It almost encapsulates what a lot of millennials and Gen Z especially, feels about boomers, many of whom are our actual parents or our friends' parents, is that you are living in a different world than I am. You truly are, and you get to choose to continue to do that probably for the rest of your life. And it just really puts it in stark contrast. And I do think it's worth noting that a lot of the folks who really showed up for Emet in certain like kind of assertive ways is because we had problematic families of origin. And I think it's really good because it's good for us to notice that, so it's not just trauma bonding without a point. Those of us raised by mentally ill parents are often the people in the friend group who then also take on a parental role with its, in this case, it was directly asked of us. It wasn't like an inappropriate, accidentally happened, but it wouldn't have been necessary if people had been parenting the whole way through for any of us. Probably none of it would have been the same. It really made me not want to do this talk, which is why I realized it was worth saying, because I was, how can this still be fucking with my head to this degree? Rambam's ladder, right? About tzedakah?
Right.
Given freely, without duress. I mean, not everyone did all, right? Some people did have to be encouraged, and some people wanted to be recognized more than others. But the point is that, yeah, we gave and continue to really insist those morals or those levels around how we actually do tzedakah. And I really feel like that's what really makes, even though I'm like, it's not a happy memory, it's a really positive effect on my life, because I think that's why anger and frustration at folks has really melted away. And being reminded of it is jarring, but it's not the focus at all in my own mind. It's just not where I go. That was fucked up and frustrating. What we did was pure. And I definitely feel finally it's more clear to me that I've learned to accept that, because I don't, and the real motivation, I don't want to lose my memories to anger. It really is my decision at this point. It's not about forgiveness or atonement, because frankly, I'd be pretty naive to expect teshuva from folks that summon their better selves during such a time.
Yeah.
I don't care about teshuva, but I do really enjoy, I mean, in that case, I care a lot about teshuva. But in that case, I care so much more about the ability to have this conversation with you and not let folks who frustrate me continue me from that. And it became a very stark choice. I can get upset about this, or I can archive it, and I can focus my feelings on my conversation with Noah.
Last things I wanted to talk about was the wedding.
So weird in retrospect. He just wanted to have a last fun thing, and and he wanted to have all these milestones that he wouldn't get to have. And I really laughed because it's so clear now he was in La La Land. He was the Lulu, as one is right when they're dying, a certain stage of dying. And my mom was like that too. A lot of people are, and they seem really charming and lovely and everything, and they are. You can't be expecting rational thought. You're not expecting the same logic and reasoning you've had with this person up until now. So his desire to get married and all that stuff is funny in retrospect, because, and it's also absurd because some people took it too seriously. Oh yeah, what about Emet? He pretends like it was gonna happen, because I mean, obviously it didn't happen because he didn't live long enough for when he thought he'd do a wedding.
He died the weekend he scheduled his wedding for.
Literally, that was kind of the point. Also knew that I think he was subconsciously looking for something that could be distracting enough to look forward to at such a time. And that was honestly, I mean, he was kind of right. Very little else. He'd had the party. Oh, what is he going to have? No, he was the wedding. It's very easy for me to understand why he thought he landed there, why. And like I said, because it wasn't so much about sex. I mean, he couldn't have had sex at that point. It was about the expression of romantic or sexual, or it was an adult thing he wasn't going to get to do simply because of how short. But he was fully capable of doing it. It just wasn't in the cards for him.
When I first asked Emet, like, who do you want to marry? And he was like,
And you were like, who? And that person was just being sweet. I mean, she was just being sweet. It's so clear in retrospect, but it is so darkly funny in retrospect. And I think he would have found it funny. I think that's the kind of humor I'm allowed to laugh at, because it is haha funny, but it is. And then my friend, 2 days before he was actually gonna die, decided he wanted to throw himself a wedding. And we were like, we've never heard of this person you say you're gonna marry. Linda, will you marry us? And Linda was, poor Linda. I mean, Linda, I really am interested to hear how she tells that story if you do interview her. She was the actual rabbi, so I see how she handled it in retrospect, and I chuckle because she was also really. I don't remember what I said, but I hope my vibe is what I remember, which was, we really don't need to worry about this, y'all. This is not something that we need to take seriously in terms of planning. All we need to do is just continue to just be listening and affirming. But wedding was good because I'd also really had been with him that long, and sometimes I think that means you can't quite see the degradation, but I could see so clearly. I was this person, because that was actually the only one of 2 times I slept over, 2 nights or so before he died. And I do have a very specific memory of that because it was very funny how he was getting. I always also thank God that J.K. Rowling didn't decide to be as crazy in public before he died, because he could still enjoy Harry Potter. Okay, I'll put on your favorite Harry Potter. So I put on 4. And we were just falling asleep. And then he was, I really want to listen to Joe Biden's biography. And at the time he wasn't the president. He was just a doddering old dude, not Genocide Joe. I was like, okay, it's my favorite one on there. But I think his wife narrates it. And that's when I realized, as I was looking through his Audible account, this doesn't exist. Emet is out of it now. Emet is just talking. And I was seriously looking for, I was like, oh, he's imagining if Joe Biden was going to read him a story for that. So I remember going, Joe Biden is narrating this. Don't you recognize him? He did Harry Potter too. And I'm like, oh, yeah. I remember that. Well, by that point, it was pretty easy. I mean, I don't know. It just wasn't even that memorable. I just remember those parts. And I will say, as much that location was harder to get to, Emet was just paying for Ubers so that I could. And that was an obvious choice. But that location was way more comfy to stay at. There was a second bed. The room was bigger. The bathroom was the same. But it was also pretty. And so even though we couldn't walk just downtown, there was actual green space to walk Roxy, but also to hang out. It had a garden. So I think that place, I don't even remember feeling any anxiety when I knew I was sleeping over, because it was actually comfortable, a little bit sweet. And you could always wander out into the garden and get some alone time. And if I'd been smoking as much weed, then I would have even been able to just go vape outside or whatever. So it really was a good reminder that having the more comfortable, more time they've spent on a palliative care setting, the more likely friends and visitors are going to want to hang out there. And I'm sure if you drove, it was even an issue because it wasn't terribly located. It just wasn't. And I dropped mine right before all that happened, because I was in too many accidents that were my fault. And thankfully, no one was ever hurt. But he was very affirming of that, and that helped. Sarah Giskin was one of the first people that we recruited. She was on that initial 4-person crew getting the group off with me and Pele. Josh? Sarah Giskin, such a good bitch. As we say in New Zealand, good bitch? Good bitch, really good. A mensch. Yeah, I always really liked her. Well, I think Jews, I really do part of Ashkenazi culture for me, and comes from even the most basic Fiddler on the Roof type things, the wedding that get by the Cossacks. There's actually a really fundamental Jewish vibe about the whole suffering and celebrating being side by side, often because of oppression, not because trying to be cute about it. But that willingness and that openness to having both at once is kind of the whole vibe of Jewish culture for me.
Yeah.
So I totally feel that. People having weddings in the camps. I mean, it's the same. And there were some folks, it was nice because there were some folks from the community who hadn't necessarily been involved, but knew about it. And so they came too. It was actually never even thought about how it just was obviously the thing to do. Yeah, I think it's so interesting you say that. I think because Kabbalat Shabbat is the fun one. Right. It's one where you like all the songs. You know what I wish? I wish I'd just been able to be like, babe, do you just want a horror? Do you want to be lifted on the chair? We could have made that happen. I don't feel guilty, but it's a lovely thing to kind of acknowledge. Neither Vic nor I care much about marriage as a concept. We're married because it's very helpful for me citizenship-wise. I wasn't going to not do that. I'm still an Ashkenazi Jew. I'm getting my citizenship here. I'm a resident now, but Vic wants to have a Jewish wedding for the culture and all this people he loves that he only got to know very briefly in West Philly. And you want to be on the chair? I don't know if I can be like, no. I know that so many people, that's what they want. They just want to be able to be on the chair during a hora, and a very normal thing to want as a Jew. That's a normal, beautiful thing that just represents what you expect to get as you get older. The funeral procession is knowing that they'll also be there for that, and quite physically and literally. It's the same. I love that in Judaism, the mitzvah for the dead is also alongside the mitzvah. Also, the Talmudic story shows this, but it's alongside the mitzvah to host the bride and groom for the Sheva Bracha. Oh, I remember that part. Because that was the part where I felt like I could have really good boundaries. And I was like, I don't do dead bodies, but I'm done. So I'm done for now.
I sat all there.
I remember all of you who did, though. I had to delegate it. I wasn't not gonna,
And I was on the last Shomer shift, and then I saw the Tahara team come in.
Was it Linda?
It was like Linda, Sophie, Nora.
I'd see after.
That's who I remember seeing their faces come in, and I remember feeling reassured because they knew and loved Emet.
How badass and goth is our culture? And I think Vic shows this back to me at times. He's okay, so you weren't able to do that part. You did that part. Y'all are all bad bitches. Something that is, by the standards, especially of mainstream white culture, really difficult and respectable. And if people know about it, they're damn, I can rely on that person in a difficult situation. I never really realized how badass they are. And I was comparing myself to the folks who can do the part with the dead body, because for me, that's a scarier part. But lots of people, and you've shown me this through your affirming words as a friend, lots of people find the part that I do most easily the hardest part. I recognize that now, that parts that I find easy and can walk people through are going to be the opposite for them. And I find that really affirming because it makes me feel less guilty for not also being able to dress my friend's dead body. Sarah, you can relax. I do love that description. If like everyone's earrings weren't in it, it wouldn't count. It wasn't about how it looked in the end. I had everyone's earrings. It wasn't holy. That's so real, though. For those of us who work in religious schools especially, we know why. Okay, I'm going to end on this, and then you actually have to end with me, because we're going to do a long Jewish goodbye either. It's so funny to me that you say I was the rabbi you wanted to be, because I'm not arguing with you about that. I think I'm still really good at what I was good at. But Noah, I'm getting verklempt right now because I'm just really glad that you're a rabbi.
Not yet.
Yeah, but you are. The thing is, once you do it, and this is why I own it, but then people will remember you as their rabbi once you start being a rabbi. It doesn't matter if you were certified. A lot of people's rabbi, whether or not I got certified. I mean, I had students that have referred, and I've had to own that. So I just refer to myself as ex-clergy. Anyone interested to know I'm not using it to apply for jobs, so it doesn't matter. If I did, I'd be more specific. But I'm just very glad because it's not because, oh my God, we're all amazing individually. And if one of us stops, then no, you're doing the kind of lessons with the kids that I'd like to think I'd be doing and we'd be doing together. And I never even thought about that application. But as soon as you said it, this is really powerful Torah. To Vic afterwards, and he'll understand why I thought it was so profound. It really is. That's a really brilliant interpretation of theology, and I don't want you to lose that. You're a peer now. You've done just as much as I did professionally as a pro-Jew. Yeah, but what I'm saying, sweetie, is I'm glad that I'm not a rabbi and you're going to be. And if you change your mind, that's cool. But if you don't, you'll be really fucking good at it. You already are. Project that has them remember the basics of why we do. They need that. What you're doing is literally exactly. That's what I mean. Your unique gift is one I think I share, bringing these really abstract concepts to very literal, tangible mitzvot that people wouldn't think of otherwise. You know what one of my very favorite pieces of theology still is Heschel's Race and Religion, where he says the first racial justice conference was between Pharaoh and Moses. We're still feeling the effects. But what I also really always mention, because it's also based in mourning in a way that most Jews they don't know this, is King was killed 4/4, which is easy to remember. He was murdered definitely by the CIA. I don't think it's crazy, right? But he was murdered. Yeah. I mean, I think thinking people know it wasn't a random thing. He was there defending sanitation workers. That's a really good one to mention as well. That's I'm going to pin that. But what I told Vic the other day, and he didn't realize just because MLK came up, and he was supposed to go to Heschel's Seder for 2 after that. And so Heschel's Seder I don't have to read about it, and I haven't because I don't like to fetishize their friendship. I like let it breathe and be a natural guide to kind of the work we do now. But Susanna Heschel mentioned that in the Sabbath, in her intro to my little copy of the Sabbath, his book, and I was shit. So whenever I think of him now, I think of a week later the Heschel family having a really solemn Seder because honored guest, and it's basically Shiva for him, the countrywide. Because I don't think a lot of people know about the Jewishness of the Jews who loved him. And that's when he was getting more and more radical. Heschel was not trying to convince him to get less critical of the Vietnam War. No. Heschel was his thought partner. So, and you're going to mention the riots, and that he said the riot is the language of the unheard. Bernice King, his daughter. Sweet Honey in the Rock is the gospel group that his daughter, Bernice King, founded. But you may not realize she wrote a bunch of the songs you've heard in Movement Spaces are from them. And I've just seen them in concert because my mom was an old Southern lady who liked gospel, and my ex-husband is Black. So I've seen them with both. They're mostly a cappella, but they are the ones who wrote this song, We Who Believe in Freedom Cannot. So a lot of songs people think are civil rights songs were actually written by his daughter. She still gets on Instagram to tell people they're misquoting her father if white celebrity use him in a racist way. She can get on there and be, that is not what my father meant. See, I did a Jewish goodbye because I was too interested in your lesson plans. You're going to be a great rabbi. Well, you and I know the first time you're thrown into a room with kids where you're really unprepared, it's really hard. And I really think that, it's entirely true. The biggest reason I knew how to teach by the time you met me is because Gray was a classroom teacher in St. Louis when we met. And my first time teaching Hebrew school in St. Louis, was really tough. So he just sat me down, taught me how to teach so I could get through that. So I always say, yeah, it doesn't come naturally, even if you're a good listener or good with kids. And the classroom is unique. Okay, I love you.
I love you too, my friend, so much.
Arbe
ma'od. Very much.
And I really just want to give you kavod out because you're doing the work we need you to do. Those who are maybe too traumatized by the institutional response, we needed you to pick up the baton, I think.
Show them that it's possible because it happened there.
Can you hear that song?
I love you so much, my friend.
Love you too. Bye.
Bye.
Sarah, thank you so much for planning this. You did a beautiful job, really.